It's time now for our press review, and for that I'm joined in the studio today by Erin Agunke. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Hexie.
Now, this Monday, it's a very important day indeed for the 2024 US presidential election, the Iowa caucus. What are the papers saying about it?
Well, many papers, Hexie, agree that this is a flawed process. This piece in the New York Times today kind of sums it up by saying so much money and energy spent on an anti-democratic process in a state with a pretty dismal track record of picking presidential nominees. This piece in the Times and saying that it's less about who wins the actual caucus and more about who wins the, quote, expectations game. She argues, though, that this could be a dangerous year for the Iowa caucuses in particular because just of how well Donald Trump is predicted to do without having spent nearly as much time, energy, or attention on the state. She concludes then that the credibility of the Iowa caucuses is at stake. Now, the Washington Post, in the same vein, kind of points out that turnout in the Iowa caucus was already pretty low, at least lower than primaries in other states. And this is partly because the system tends to kind of exclude people who can't show up on the one night that the voting happens. And it's only every 4 years. And that's for several reasons. It could be people have disabilities, they have to work, they have childcare needs, or extreme weather. In the case of this year, there is, of course, both freezing temperatures and snowfall. So Democrats, for this reason, have been increasingly critical of the caucus system and are instead actually conducting a mail-in primary in Iowa this year, a system that they think will include and give more voters the chance to participate.
And Erin, Donald Trump is expected to do well in Iowa, and that is, it's important to say, partly thanks to a very specific category of voters.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Hexie, this got a lot of attention today in the French press, specifically 3 papers here in France focusing on how evangelical Christians then have been instrumental in cementing Donald Trump's lead in the Midwest, Iowa included. Now, La Croix today, the Christian paper, tells us that more than 300 pastors in Iowa, representing the state's 99 counties, have publicly endorsed Trump. Those quoted in the piece say that they support him because of his strict abortion policies, his hardline stance on immigration, and even the fact that he is a target, that he's hated by the mainstream elite, especially on the left.
Well, in some other news today, Erin, Sunday marked 100 days since the Hamas attacks across southern Israel. And there is little hope for relief anytime soon.
Yeah, Hexie, a piece in the Israeli paper Haaretz today says that for both Israelis and Palestinians, this 101st day today of the war and the days that follow are very much likely to look like the first 100 days. That includes the continuation of Israeli ground operations in Gaza, the deaths of more Israeli soldiers, and more protests by families of the hostages. In the West Bank, it says that Israeli security forces are likely to expand their raids, while in the north, the escalation with Hezbollah will continue. The editorialist in Haaretz then despairs that most Israelis still seem to think, despite all of the bloodshed on both sides, that military action is the only solution. And so he argues that there's really a desperate need for a paradigm shift. He says it's high time to seek an end to the war and to think about how it's possible for something to grow from the horror despite our pain. He says that this should include demanding the return of all hostages, no matter how high the cost, and launching an international process that would create a sustainable agenda for the future.
Erin, you've also found a story today about a new report on how the rich, well, they're just getting richer.
Yeah, Hexie, and unfortunately, the corollary that you also hear to that is also true. The poor are getting poorer. This is according to an Oxfam report that The Guardian focuses on today. It reveals that the world's 5 richest men have more than doubled their collective fortunes to a whopping $869 billion since 2020, while the world's poorest 60%, that's almost 5 billion people, lost money. This report saying that the gap between the rich and the poor is also likely to increase, while the world will surely be crowning its first trillionaire within the next decade. Even worse, it says that if current trends continue, world poverty will not be solved for another 229 years. Now, French paper Libération today links the release of this Oxfam report to the opening of the 54th World Economic Forum in Davos, which, of course, Emmanuel Macron will be attending from Wednesday on. The paper says that the French president, though, risks reactivating his rather unflattering reputation as president of the rich and for the rich, as the wealthy in France, as the less wealthy, rather, of course, are still struggling with inflation. It's worth pointing out, as Libération does today, that France actually has 3 million millionaires, making it the country with the third highest numbers of rich people. And the paper says that that is at least thanks in part to Emmanuel Macron having scrapped the wealth tax.
And Erin, you're finishing with a piece on how ancient Egypt, for its part, apparently did a rather good job of looking after its poor, at least, that is, as far as healthcare is concerned.
Yeah, Western society then perhaps has a lot to learn because Newsweek tells us that healthcare in ancient Egypt was both advanced and successful. Now, all of this information is coming from a new book called Medicine and Healing Practices in Ancient Egypt by researchers Rosalie David and Roger Forshaw. And they explain that healthcare, including pharmaceutical treatments, basic surgery, and magical remedies, was universally available to men and women from all cross-sections of society. The researchers say that this universal approach, along with an enlightened attitude towards things like disabilities, deformities, and care for the sick and elderly, was kind of an all-encompassing system that worked in ancient Egypt for about 3,000 years. It's not insignificant, but it was also impressive in the way that it had used innovative ways to save lives, some of which persist today in Western medicine, and that includes surgical techniques like stitching and the use of medical instruments like scalpels, both of which were actually first referred to by ancient Egyptians. So the West has learned and still perhaps does have a lot to learn from the way that they functioned.
Just hope they had some decent anesthetics along with those excellent scalpels.
Probably not.
Erin Gook here with a look through the day's press. Thank you very much. Well, that's all we have time for right now. Do stay tuned, though. More news coming up in just a few minutes' time here on France 24.